So I'm taking this opportunity to introduce this session. The session is called Addressing Bias and Discrimination, Internal and Interpersonal, presented by Cassie, who will provide you with some practical tips on how to address your internal and interpersonal biases and stand up against bias and discrimination in your own workplace, community, or family. This webinar will walk you through some of the steps to address bias and discrimination by looking at yourself and your responses to situations and people, recognizing your privilege and power, and working to change your responses. As we recognize the events in the past, we need to stand strong with courage to be able to change the future. So I would like to introduce our fantastic speaker for this session. Cassie is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program Manager for Niagara region. In this role, she's working to create a diversity, equity, and inclusion action plan for the region as part of joining the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities. She previously held the position of Strategic and Health Equity Initiatives Coordinator at Niagara Region Public Health and Emergency Services, which involved leading the Health Equity Strategic Plan at the departmental level and initiating the Health Equity Informed Planning Project, which incorporates considerations of health and healthy equity into project planning across the corporation through health impact assessments. She spent a decade overseas working and studying in 6 countries across 4 continents, which resulted in a PhD in sport management from the University of Johannesburg, a Master of Social Science in Practical Anthropology from the University of Cape Town, and a Bachelor of Arts honors degree in International Development Studies from the University of Toronto. If you have any questions for our speaker during this session, please post them in the Q&A tab, or you can send them to me privately by clicking my profile under the Details tab down below and sending me a message. Please share your experience about this leadership summit on social media with our event hashtag NLSW2021 to be featured on our social wall. And let's begin. I will pass it off to Cassie.
Thank you so much, Eve, for that introduction, and great to see all of you come over for this last workshop of the day and of the whole conference. So welcome to all of you here. Thanks for sticking with us. I'm going to share my PowerPoint screen and get started right away since we're a little bit late getting started. And usually this session I'll do over a few hours. So I've condensed it already, and now I'm going to try and condense it a little bit more so we still have some time for some questions. So my computer is a bit slow today, but hopefully it will cooperate with us. There we go. So I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement, and this is something we've recently updated. You'll see that it's a little bit different than the ones you've been listening to throughout the conference. So at the region, we just recently did some consultations that took quite a few months, and we've landed on this updated land acknowledgement. So Niagara region is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattawandurunk, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The Regional Municipality of Niagara stands with all Indigenous peoples, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. So hopefully in the next half hour, we're going to go through a couple of things to help you recognize your own privilege and biases. You'll learn some skills to address internal and interpersonal biases, and you'll understand some opportunities to stand against bias and discrimination in your workplace, community, or family. So first of all, I want you to grab a piece of paper or open something on your computer and type or write the numbers 1 to 6 down that page in a column. As you're doing that, I'll describe what I'm going to have you do. I'm going to show you some photos of some different people. And beside each number, you're going to write your initial gut reaction or feeling with a second number. So if you see that picture and your first initial reaction is you can't stand them, you disagree with what you think they stand for, maybe you're afraid of what they look like, you put a number 1. If when you first see that, you think, you know, if I saw them on the street, I'd probably stay away from them. I'd want to avoid them. I'd maybe cross to the other side or just kind of pretend that I can't see them. That'd be a number 2. Number 3, if you don't really care one way or the other, you'll tolerate them. You wouldn't go out of your way to make them your new friend, but you're also not going to treat them negatively. Number 4 is if you would accept that person, what you think their choices might be, you'd be nice to them, maybe you'd want to be their friend. And number 5 would be if you respect that person, you admire who you think they are, you'd look and seek them out for advice. So just a disclaimer, the aim is not to reinforce any stereotypes, but really to reveal some of your own biases. So I'm only going to show each picture about 10 seconds and carry on to the next one. Now, normally I'd break us up and we'd have some time to discuss, but since we don't have that much time today, I just want you to reflect on this and maybe you can put your responses in the chat box. So when you look back to your responses, did any of them surprise yourself? What other kinds of things came to your mind when you saw the photos? Did you notice any patterns in your responses to the photos? Maybe you can go back later on and reflect on that a little bit more. For the sake of time, I'm going to go over a few different definitions here. So to start off with, we think about the potential biases that you might have just recognized in yourself through those pictures. So a bias is a disproportionate weight in favor of or against an idea or thing, usually in a way that is closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. People may develop biases for or against an individual, group, or a belief. When you are unaware of a bias, that's considered an unconscious or an implicit bias. A cognitive bias is a strong preconceived notion of someone or something based on information we have, we perceive we have, or that we lack. These preconceptions are mental shortcuts the human brain produces to expedite information processing, to quickly help it make sense of what it's seeing and make decisions based on that information. There's multiple types of cognitive biases, including confirmation bias, where your brain quickly accepts information that fits into your preconceived notions and rejects contradictory information, leading to a confirmation that the beliefs and thoughts you already have are accurate, even if sometimes they aren't. A stereotype is an overgeneralized belief about a group of people, usually based on media portrayals or an experience with one person from a group that's extended to all members of the group. They can be based on race, gender, religion, or any type of diversity. They can be positive or negative. Prejudice is a judgment or opinion formed before all facts are known, usually founded on stereotypes and linked to emotions. Discrimination is when stereotypes and prejudice result in negative behaviors or actions towards members of a group due to their membership or perceived membership in that group. This includes the isms, such as racism, sexism, ageism, etc., but can be related to any type of diversity. For example, we may believe that people with a lot of tattoos are dangerous or violent, a stereotype commonly associated with biker gangs. We then feel afraid or even hate towards people that we see that have a lot of tattoos. That shows our prejudice. If we see someone with tattoos banging at the door of our house, we may call the police and report them. That's then discrimination. A positive stereotype could be the belief that all Asians are good at math. This could lead us to feel admiration towards them, And when we are hiring for a finance role, we privilege someone who is Asian. This poster here on the slide is from an anti-Islamophobia campaign by the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants. Microaggressions, according to Daryl W. Sue, who has written 2 books on the topic, are the everyday slights, indignities, put-downs, and insults that people of color, women, the LGBT populations, or those who are marginalized experience in their day-to-day interactions with people. They're often in the form of a joke or potentially intended as a compliment, such as, "You don't look gay," or "You speak English very well," or seemingly innocent questions such as, "Where do you come from?" or "What are you?" They can also be in the form of an action, like clutching your purse when you see a Black man, or staring at someone that's using a wheelchair. People who engage in microaggressions are usually unaware of it and think of themselves as good, decent people. And their comments or actions are not usually hostile or done with negative intent. However, research has shown that microaggressions, although seemingly small and sometimes innocent, can take a real psychological toll on the mental health of their recipients. This toll can lead to anger and depression and even lower work productivity and problem-solving abilities. Like the straw that broke the camel's back, these seemingly small words or actions can result in a response that may seem like an overreaction. Oppression occurs at multiple levels. Oppression is the use of power or privilege by a socially, politically, economically, or culturally dominant group to empower, take away or reduce power, marginalize, silence, or otherwise subordinate another social group or category. Oppression occurs at multiple levels that interact with each other. At the individual level, a person's beliefs and actions can serve to perpetuate oppression. At the interpersonal level, interactions between people within and across difference. And the systemic level, where policies and practices within or between organizations that can perpetuate oppression. Systemic discrimination is practices, policies, or laws that disadvantage a particular group or people. Privilege is special advantage or entitlement used to benefit certain groups of people for the detriment of others. And anti-oppression is the work of actively challenging and removing oppression perpetuated by power and inequalities in society, both at the systemic and individual levels. I want to show a quick little video. So I'm going to stop sharing this so that I can click on the video for you. And this is a video by John Amaechi, who is a psychologist as well as a previous NBA player who lives in England. And he was asked during the 2019, just after the George Floyd murder and in the wake of all the Black Lives Matter protests, what does privilege mean? And so I'm going to, hopefully this will work, and you can listen to him talk about this.
We've been engaged in a global conversation about race and racism. You've probably had discussions at home, at school, or at work, and in those conversations, you've probably heard the term white privilege. You may have even had this term used in a way that felt like an insult or an accusation. Others will have told you that it's all just made up to make white people feel bad, and none of this is right. Privilege is a hard concept for people to understand because normally when we talk of privilege, we imagine immediate, unearned riches and tangible benefits for anyone who has it. But white privilege, and indeed all privilege, is actually more about the absence of inconvenience, the absence of an impediment or challenge. And as such, when you have it, you really don't notice it. But when it's absent, it affects everything you do. There are lots of types of privilege out there. The privilege of being born into a wealthy family versus a poor family is kind of obvious. But then there's the privilege of being able-bodied versus having or acquiring a disability that most of us take for granted. I have 2 very close friends who are wheelchair users, and I'll be honest, when I first met them, I was completely ignorant about the everyday ways their lives are made harder through no fault of their own. Some of these ways are simply thoughtless, but some of them are just the way we live, just the way we build infrastructure, just the way everything works. That just makes their life harder than mine. That's just one of the ways that I'm privileged. And understanding that, embracing that, doesn't make me a bad person. But ignoring it raises the chance that my friends will be excluded in ways that are not obvious to me. And as their friend, I can't allow that. There's a good chance as a white person watching this, your life is already hard. Every day you have to overcome some difficulty or challenge just to get by, but you can still have white privilege. White privilege doesn't mean you haven't worked hard or you don't deserve the success you've had. It doesn't mean that your life isn't hard or that you've never suffered. It simply means that your skin color has not been the cause of your hardship or suffering. There is nothing but a benefit to understanding our own privileges, white and otherwise. It brings us closer to those who are different. It helps us be vigilant about the ways we treat others different than us. It helps us make a society that is fairer and more equal. Having white privilege doesn't make your life easy, but understanding it can help you realize why some people's lives are harder than they should be.
All right, I love that video. He can summarize kind of some really complex thoughts in so much less time than I could. So I really like showing that clip. I'm gonna go back to my presentation now. And there's another interview. I'll put the link in the chat that John Amaechi does with James O'Brien. Talks a little bit more about his background and his experiences with privilege. And it's really very fascinating. So I'll stick that in the chat. So to carry on, a number of you may have heard the term intersectionality before. This was first introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw in a paper entitled Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, published in 1989. I'm not going to read this whole quote, but basically what it's talking about is that we are all complex people and we have multiple layers that make up who we are. Those layers interact with each other and with the other people around us and their layers, so that in certain contexts, some people are more privileged than others. So a lot of what John was talking about in that clip. A few more key terms, and then we'll talk about how can we address these. So diversity is the presence of difference in the lived experiences and perspectives of people. This can include so many different things, including race, ethnicity, place of origin, political belief, sex, gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, age, as well as things that you might not usually think about, such as seniority, ways of thinking, history of trauma or education, your family composition. All of those different things make up diversity. Equity is when everyone receives fair treatment, access, and opportunity and advancement in all areas of life. And inclusion is the creation of welcoming spaces and opportunities for everyone to participate and succeed. So how do we address bias and discrimination? A concept that I really like when I'm talking about this is cultural humility. And there's 4 key principles. The first is lifelong learning and critical self-reflection. Everyone has a history with their own experiences and self-understanding. We need to understand and examine our own and unconscious biases and be willing to humbly ask people about what they think, experience, and want. Critically examining ourselves and being humble and willing to learn from others is important. Everyone is the expert of their own life experiences. Second, we need to recognize and challenge power imbalances. We need to provide opportunities for community-informed advocacy, which is the process of learning to identify, believe in, and build on the assets and adaptive strengths of communities and their members. People in the community often know best what they want and what they need, and they are in the best position to inform others of what that is. 3, develop mutually beneficial partnerships with communities, doing with and not for at the individual and institutional levels. And 4th, advocating for and maintaining institutional consistency and accountability. Institutions also need to be self-reflective. Institutional power and privilege is often invisible to the people who are privileged by it, by the way organizations are organized and operate. We need to be honest as the institutions that you work within for where you are and where you hope to be. So there's multiple levels to address bias and discrimination. At the individual level, you can examine who you are, your thoughts, beliefs, and actions. At the interpersonal level, you can educate yourself and change your actions. And at the institutional or systemic level, you can change policies, processes, and culture. Today, we don't have time for all of this, so we're just going to focus on the first 2 areas. Addressing internal bias. So in order to address the biases that we discussed earlier, there's a number of steps you can take. This comes from a concept by Felicity Menzies, a CEO and principal consultant at include-empower.com, a diversity and inclusion consultancy. So it starts with S, slow down. Be mindful and consider your responses. Studies show greater discrimination when people are rushed, stressed, or tired. So you need to monitor your micro biases, such as your eye contact, how much you smile or you frown, your body language, or if you interrupt someone when interacting with them. Be aware of your interactions and be self-reflective. Perspective taking. Actively imagine the thoughts and feelings of others. Research shows that although we automatically simulate the mental and motor activity of in-group members, so people who are like us, this process is much less responsive to people who are different from us. The perspective taking refers to the active contemplation of others' psychological experiences, basically thinking and imagining the feelings and viewpoints of others. Research shown that perspective taking has positive implications for intergroup relations, including increased empathy, reduction of unconscious prejudice attitudes and discriminatory behaviors, and decreased activation of negative stereotypes. Third one is A, ask yourself. Question your assumptions. Does this person remind you of someone or yourself? Is this a positive or a negative connection? Are there specific things about that person that are influencing your perspective? Are those qualities relevant at this time? And what have you based your assumptions on? C is for cultural intelligence. Interpret behavior through other cultural lenses, not your own. You need to actively seek cultural appropriate explanations for behaviors. Menzies writes, while perspective taking for empathy focuses on the emotions of the other person without reference to cultural differences, making culturally appropriate attributions focuses on understanding the other person's perspective through their cultural frame of reference. Imagining the world from the perspective of others helps you transcend the automaticity of your own cultural framework and to interpret their intentions and behaviors more accurately, reducing misunderstandings, misattributions, and conflict. End of quote. In order to do this, you need to get to know and understand other cultures, which you can do through interactions, talking with people and asking questions, watching movies, or reading books. The first E is for exemplars. Think of counter-stereotypical individuals. Numerous studies have shown that unconscious stereotyping is reduced by engaging in counter-stereotypical imagery. Focus and dwell on examples of people you know of that do not align with your stereotype. For instance, John Amaechi, in the video we watched, is a psychologist who's 6'8", gay, Black, and English with a Nigerian father, and a retired NBA player. In the interview I mentioned earlier, he discusses how he is constantly breaking down mental boxes. The one that stuck with me the most was the counter that a professional athlete can also be intelligent. He was brought up and always thought of himself as a psychologist who played basketball, not the other way around. And he was always coming up against that in his interactions with people, especially in the United States. So I highly recommend watching that. And the final E is expand. Form diverse friendships. Research shows that forming diverse friendships helps to dismantle social categorizations and decrease bias. When you share information about unique backgrounds, experiences, and skills, this helps outgroup members to be seen as individuals rather than part of a social category that you can then relate to. So you need to seek out interactions with different people. Counter the confirmation and unconscious biases that your brain wants to default to. Find people who may look, sound, think, or act differently than you, and get to know them, learn from them, and find the shared understandings, perspectives, and qualities. You may find, or you will find, that you have more similarities to people than you realized. If you're unsure about where to find people who are different from you, start by watching different movies, read books from a different perspective, watch YouTube videos or TED Talks. As society is opening up again now and some events are starting, go to the different kinds of events, volunteer with different groups, and talk with people who may be different from yourself. This does take time and effort, and you need to give yourself patience. You can't change yourself overnight. So the last section we're going to look at is addressing interpersonal bias. So the Conscious Communication Social Justice Phrase Guide talks about a few different points. First of all, accurately and respectfully talk about people's identities, situations, and roles in societies. Second, retire outdated and problematic phrases and metaphors. Third, talk about policies and solutions in realistic and accurate ways that spur action. Focus on strengths and positive action rather than dwelling on problems or getting caught in analysis paralysis. Fourth, lift up unity, participation, and cooperation over division, individualism, and competition. And finally, reinforce prosperity over scarcity. Avoid using zero-sum analogies. I'm not going to go through all of this in terms of sake of time, and there's many more examples. But basically, when you're talking to people, think about the person first, then the challenge, diagnosis, or treatment that they're receiving. Inclusive language is another good thing to utilize. It involves knowing about and showing respect for all community members or colleagues, providing a more accurate view of the real world by reflecting social diversity rather than perpetuating stereotypes. And it's relevant to a wide audience, helping everyone to feel reflected in what's being said, presented, or discussed. So rather than the options at the top, you can refer to groups of people using terms such as friends, folks, or everyone. Removing problematic language. There's a lot of things that we say that have history based on them. So one that I recently learned was the term stakeholder, which in when the colonials first came and settled on this land, when they were deciding who could have which plot of land, they used stakes to identify the borders of someone's land. And then when they were making decisions within that community, only people who had stakes, basically owned land, could then be included in the decisions. So rather than saying stakeholder, it's better to use terms such as community partner or community member. You can look up some of these other examples on your own time. So a couple of tips here. I know we're running short on time, so I'll try and be quick. In terms of intercultural communication, be authentic, genuine, and humble. Connect with people, be respectful, and be vulnerable. Second, ask open-ended questions. Build relationships and trust first before asking some questions like, where were you born? Or questions about culture. Third, practice active listening. So focus on what the other person's saying. Don't think about your response while the other person is talking. Use positive body language. Don't attack or put someone down because of their opinions. Be patient, allow time for them to talk. Silence is okay as well. Fourth, don't be defensive. Be open to make mistakes and work to make changes. Apologize if you make a mistake as well. Fifth, be willing to discuss your own attitudes and biases and how they may have hurt others in the past. Reflect on how you felt, what you did or said. Habits are formed by cues, routines, and rewards. Support yourself and your colleagues, family, or friends in their progress. And then be an ally. Stand up against bias and discrimination. Don't laugh at discriminatory jokes. If you're silent, you are agreeing with the problem. And then finally, how do you actually confront bias or discrimination in others? So the first step is to reflect on your feelings and the response that you have to what someone has said or done. Weigh your options. Speaking up creates opportunities for change, shows your support for the person who may be offended, and provides an opportunity for growth. If you lead other people, it's part of your responsibility to support your employees and make sure the environment at work is inclusive and safe. However, the person that made the comment may become dismissive or defensive. And if you're standing up for yourself against a person in authority, there may be professional or personal risks that you may face if you do take a stand. If you're willing to speak up, there's a few approaches you can take. First of all, don't start off by being accusatory. Don't call someone a racist or a misogynist. That's definitely going to put them on the defensive and you will not have a productive discussion. You can explain how a comment made you feel. You could say, I know it wasn't your intent, but that made me feel uncomfortable. Or I'm confused by what you said. You could refer to a statement directly. After explaining your feelings, you can follow up with a question such as, what did you mean by that comment? Or tell me more about what you were thinking. Hopefully that opens up the discussion and you can share information about the comment, explore the bias, or clear up any misunderstandings. If you're not comfortable with addressing the subject right away, or the moments passed while you were processing your response, that's all right. The opportunity isn't completely lost. You could talk to the person later and use the same strategies as I just discussed. In some situations, you may want to call out the problem and state it directly, such as, that comment was offensive to women, or that was a discriminatory action towards people of African descent. If comments continue and you feel uncomfortable, or your attempts to address the problem don't seem to be making a difference, consider going to a person in authority. Find others who may feel the same as you, or have also experienced discrimination in the same way, and go to a leader together. If you are the leader, take the matter seriously and address it. Ideally, there are some organizational supports where you work. Most workplaces have a policy against harassment, or you could go to your human rights representative. In Ontario, we also have the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and there are legal paths that you could take. That's it for me. I know we haven't left too much time for discussion. Hopefully you've been able to recognize your privilege and bias, have learned some skills, and understand some ways to stand against bias and discrimination in your locations. And as a final takeaway thought, what kind of skills will you take from today and incorporate into your personal and professional life? So it's time for questions. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everyone. And I do see that there's some stuff in the chat box.
Well, thank you very much Cassie, for this lovely presentation. It's amazing how much we can learn from this, and there is so much depth to it that almost each point required its own time. I was really impressed by the selection of ideas you brought forward, and the idea that absence of inconvenience equals privilege. That was quite remarkable. I never thought of it myself as well. I've looked at the Q&A, and there's been a lot of praise and thank you passed along, and very eye-opening. Let's see, there is question that came up from Francisca was, what is the biggest challenge we are currently facing in terms of bias in Niagara?
That is a huge question. Thank you for that. And I'm glad that everyone's been engaging with the session. Right now, a little bit of background what I'm doing professionally in terms of coming up with a diversity, equity, inclusion action plan for the region. We've done some focus groups, and we had a staff survey that we've done, and we're about to go live with a community survey in a couple of weeks to try and figure out what are some of the biggest challenges in the region in terms of bias and discrimination. I think one of the big ones is that as Niagara is becoming more diverse with people moving here from across the world, and especially an influx of people from more diverse areas within Ontario, is that there's a fairly large group of people in Niagara that don't think that they have biases or discriminatory practices. And when people are coming in from different places, they are experiencing bias and discrimination. And so it's trying to work for help people who are mostly white, middle or older, have conservative Christian perspectives, as of course there is more diversity within Niagara than that, but helping them to understand that they do have biases within the way that they look at the world, and helping to make Niagara a more welcoming and inclusive place, I think is one of our biggest challenges that we're facing at the moment.
Thank you very much, Cassie. I also would like to say that I think it's the blind spot that all of us have, and not everyone feels comfortable to come forward with highlighting what your blind spot is. So maybe you have some additional tips how to address the blind spot that we all experience.
Yeah, thanks for that, Eve. I think that's really key and aligns with what I was just saying is that, we do have, kind of there's societal blind spots, but there's also individual blind spots. And helping to address that is really making sure that you're being reflective of your own interactions, what you say. I've been doing this type of work for a long time and I still make mistakes. So it's also being easy on yourself. You will make mistakes in doing this. Be humble, admit your mistakes, talk about it, and be open with people to say, you just said something. I don't think that what you said, you meant that, and the way that it came across. So holding each other accountable, having some friends that you can really be honest with and call out if, oh, whoops, you just said that, and I know you probably didn't mean it. One thing that I keep finding myself saying is things like, oh, that's driving me crazy, or everything's just crazy these days. And I'm really trying to be aware of that. Every time I say that, I'm okay, that's not what I meant. I meant things are incredibly busy right now, or I'm just feeling overwhelmed. So being really cognizant of the words that you say and the actions that you say, and all of us have work to do.
Thank you, Cassie. That was very good. We also received another comment from Samantha. She says that she thinks many of our biases are generational as well. So we are taught them from a young age, and we don't often question what we've been taught. That she thinks a lot of the work is in questioning those taught lessons and then changing our behavior. So it assumes that we take a lot of our responsibility and start questioning it, versus it's really hard to change something that you've been taught when you were very early on and reinforced over the years. So it almost sounds like it's going to be even to work through these biases would need regular reinforcement as well.
Absolutely. And those things are reinforced in the media that we see in our interactions with different people in our community and in our family, who may also have those same biases because they were things that were taught to us either through school, through media, or through our family as we were growing up. And there's some biases that are positive as well, but a lot of them do have a negative connotation to them. So really that reflexive piece is incredibly important. Questioning your assumptions. If you starting to think about, and recognize the way that you react or think when you see things. So I saw someone said, they felt uncomfortable making judgments about someone just from a picture. However, that's what we're doing all the time. As soon as we see something, our brain is making those connections. So be cognizant of what your mind is doing, what your body is doing. You might tense up when someone enters the room, whereas someone else enters the room and you're very relaxed. So in order for us to be able to counteract those things, we really have to first recognize them in ourselves and question why do I have that thought? Why am I having that reaction? And then you can figure out you can start to change how you react.
Thank you very much, Cassie. There is a question that came up was, that's wonderful insight and wisdom indeed, and aligns with our courage to lead as well. What media can you recommend that help to build awareness of our societal biases?
Well, that's a good question. The one that I think of off the top of my head, I don't actually really like. There's a thing from Harvard where you can look at kind of your biases and you can take a test. I don't actually really like that. I've done it, and I think there's other better ways to do it. Off the top of my head, I can't think of one. Although things like, I forgot to put in the chat box the video from John Amaechi. There, I've just stuck it in now. Things like that, videos, things that will counter your stereotypes. So rather than when you're on Netflix, I know you kind of take that as a chill time. Rather than watching the same kind of movies or videos or shows, choose a different kind of documentary. Look at something from someone else's perspective. And that can really help you see the world through a different lens. try and connect with someone that has a different background from you or had a different experience growing up than you, and ask them some interesting questions about how they experience the world around them. Those are some ways that you can really see differences. There's actually, I'm thinking of it, it's called AMI. I'll search for it. It's an accessibility media something, but they have a whole bunch of TV shows, podcasts, and like radio shows that are from different kinds of perspectives of people that live with different kinds of disabilities. They have some fabulous stuff on there. They actually have a whole series on questions that are asked towards people with different kinds of disabilities. And it's those questions that maybe you always want to ask, but you're kind of afraid to ask, or you don't have someone to ask. And they just put them out there, and they have people who have that, so like multiple sclerosis or people who are blind, for instance. They answer those questions from their perspective. So that's a really good thing. I'll look for that link and I'll put it in the chat as well.
Thank you very much, Cassie. Very good. And we've received some good chat comments as well. Holly has highlighted at CKY our privileged on Instagram as a wealth of knowledge. So I haven't checked that out, but that's something to look as well. And Shanza mentioned about the Gandhi quote, which is quite good. It is important to acknowledge, learn, unlearn, educate, action, reflect on this incredible journey at all levels, and be the change you want to see in the world. Empathy and compassion and courage to lead. Very, very relevant and good comments. And Cassie, thank you. I see that ami.ca link. So hopefully everyone has a chance to check out those links, those resources. We are closing the session for today. We are getting close to the 4 o'clock closing ceremonies. I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Cassie, and all the participants for joining us this afternoon. It was wealth of knowledge. Very grateful for this. And this does end our speakers for day 3. And next up is 4 p.m. our closing ceremonies, and hope you'll have a chance to join there. Once again, thank you, and may you have a great rest of the day, and hopefully we'll stay in touch and finish strong this seminar session.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.